Another big question: how can something physical cause conscious experiences? Or how is the brain connected to our conscious experiences? Also known as the interaction problem, the classical problem from Descartes and onwards. So I'm going to suggest a solution to this problem now, and we'll start by a little recap. We remember that we've seen previously from physics that we have these fields, one field for each particle, but they can interact. So the fields can interact. One particle can turn into another, or they can influence each other, how they move, etc. And it's possible also to describe, it's described in very detail on the lower levels, on the particle, for the particle fields, but we can also describe how a temperature field can interact with the wind field, and how wind can change temperature and temperature can change wind. But maybe that's also reducible to interaction at the lower level, and it's not so important whether the interaction happens at a higher or lower ontological level, because both things will fit well with what I say now. But our question then is, how can something physical, like brain activity, cause conscious experiences, and how can they be connected when it seems to, if they are so different things, how can there be a cause-effect connection there? Let's think of the brain then as a field of neurons, which again, so that's a description of the brain as a field at a high level, high ontological level, but it also consists of particles, of course, so it's reducible also to fields at lower ontological level. Physical activity in the brain, and that's the idea now, is that it can activate things happening in the qualia field, just as one physical field can make changes in another physical field. The idea is that physical activity in the brain can make changes in the qualia field, the field of consciousness. And at the beginning, this was just random. That's my theory then, that it was just all sorts of random connections and activations, just like you could have various particles randomly colliding, but then gathering after a while into atoms and into molecules and things. So in the beginning there were just these random connections and activations, but through evolution the brain would form itself in a way that made it activate the qualia field in more systematic and useful ways. So just a random physical interconnection first, but the brain would form the way it did in order to activate the qualia field in a useful way. And I don't know the detail of how that's done. I think that it can be explored, as I said in the previous video, if you have systematic stimuli and investigating what happens in the brains, the different variables that change when people describe their conscious experiences of gradual changes. It should be possible to find out more about how the brain changes correlates with the changes in conscious experiences. And I don't have this detailed theory, and then you may be very disappointed and say, well, why should I believe in this very undetailed theory? Well, the reason is that it solves the interaction problem in an interesting way that I have seen no other theory do, because it allows us on the one hand to say that, well, consciousness is very different from physical things as we experience it to be. So you can say that, and at the other hand you can also say that there is an interaction and we can explain how it happens without disturbing conservation of energy or the principle of causal closure. We can understand how there can be an interaction, because in field theory the interaction happens at the level of equations. We saw that in a video long ago, that one particle field has equations connected to it, and another particle field has equations connected to that, and if they interact, well, then we put the equations together to make a new equation to describe that interaction. So it's the equations that change and describe how things move and behave. And so if we think of qualia as this field, and interactions between fields happen at the level of these mathematical equations, then there's no problem in, two different things are interacting. Well, they are fields. They aren't that different. Fields interact at the level of equations, and so we can think of this interaction as not something mysterious, but as a normal kind of interaction. And again, I don't know, I don't have suggestion for equations. It's not at that level of detail, but usually, well, you have mathematical equations in the IIT theory of consciousness, but it has a lot of other problems. So this theory has the great advantage that it allows us both to say that consciousness is very different from physical. On the other hand, there can be we can understand how there can be causal interaction without them being too different at the area or in the nexus or at the level where that interaction happens, and without then disturbing causal closure or conservation of energy, because then the energy is depending on what happens in the physical field, while what happens in the Queyle field just takes into consideration it's influenced by what happens in the physical field. So because it is a theory that can allow us to maintain two important claims that we want to maintain into one coherent theory, I suggest that this is a good theory of consciousness and a good solution to the interaction problem.